Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 45 of Genn and Millie, where a Gen Xer and millennial share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. The whole world. We are your, the whole big universe. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess.
Okay, so I wanted to first talk about a recent podcast I started listening to. I know when we first changed to podcasting, we talked a little bit about like our favorite podcasts, what we'd recommend, and we asked the audience for their recommendations for us for podcasts. So, you know, I listen to a very wide variety of podcasts, all the way from true crime to sermons, right? Murder to like sermons, right? So it's like a really wide range of listening and just interests. But I got an advertisement for a new podcast that started, and everything about what it was about intrigued me. So then I started listening, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. The podcast is called Inferial, and the definition of the word inferial is something that fades quickly. Ooh. So, or something that fades away and becomes obsolete. And so the very first example was, or they've done like an episode where it's kind of an investigative journalist who works with people in museums, people in archival work, that are trying to save the things that are inferior in our world. So the last episode was on switchboards and telephone communication. The episode before that was on crossword puzzles and how that has become less inferior. It's become, more popular. But what was the film and so many examples. The logo for it is a Victrola with the external megaphone. Music Box was like the name of the first episode. Right. So anyway, so it's like each one they dive into kind of the history of it, what it looks like today, and essentially like how it shaped our culture in some form or fashion.
So that is really, let's do a little bit of strength spotting there with your context and love of history, but also to think about, I think even that word, and to think about what fades quickly. Mm-hmm. There are so many components when I look back generationally that feel like are lost.
Yeah. Yep.
So the way that I used to communicate with my friends was through note writing. And I have beautiful notes. Also inappropriate notes, but I have beautiful notes from my friends that I kept, of course I kept. And that was our means of communication during class. So you wouldn't have sent a text, and you didn't have enough time in the hallway, so you'd have to write these things out and then pass them. And they were very ornately folded.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And there was great information in there. Mm-hmm. I kept a lot of those, and I wonder how many of my friends kept anything like that. But I did keep a lot of those, and I did keep, of course, I kept all of my letters. I think we've talked about this on a previous episode. I kept all my letters from Reed, who was my first love. I met at band camp, and he played the saxophone and wore really cool Batman gear, and he had like this dark hair. He was a rocker. You just knew it. And he wrote me letters. And they were his penmanship is very unique. Yeah. But they would come with, they were probably 4 notebook pages worth of beautiful words. Yeah. And then it would smell like his cologne. And so I would walk out to the mailbox, especially in the summer. They were the best. I would walk out to the mailbox, and there would be, a letter from Reed. And I knew right away based on the handwriting. Yeah. So I got to thinking about this the other day, and my Aunt Meg, who I just went to see, my Uncle Mark was in the hospital, and I just went to see my Aunt Meg and sat with her.
Aunt Meg and Mark?
Yeah.
I have an Aunt Meg and Mark.
Well, they're my godparents, but I call them Uncle Mark and Aunt Meg. But they are like an auntie and uncle to me for sure. Yes. So I went and sat with Meg for a while at the hospital, which was lovely, and she was talking about how she writes a letter to her granddaughter every year. And Meg's penmanship is, it's absolutely, undeniably Meg. Yeah. So when I see something in the mail from her, I know it's her. So I thought about that. And penmanship, we rarely write. Yeah. So when I think about, it's M-I-M.
Inferior. I looked it up so I could spell it for people. E-P-H-E-M-E-R-A-L. Ephemeral. That's how you pronounce
ephemeral?
it. Ephemeral.
Ephemeral.
I totally am pronouncing it wrong. Ephemeral.
Okay. So when we think about those things that fade quickly, even generationally, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because handwriting, your handwriting is so distinct.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I love to write. And I think about this even when you were talking about that. So my grandpa, my mom's dad, wrote a letter to each of us that we were to open on our 21st birthday. My grandpa passed away 6 months before my 21st birthday. And I waited to open it until my 21st birthday. And just like the fact that he was living through that still, right? Like, our words don't fade away after we leave. It was just so beautiful. I don't know why.
That is.
Like, just like, and the note, like, you know, your Aunt Meg and Uncle Mark,
Right.
you know, when they're gone, you'll have those notes forever
Right.
from them.
So I have this box that says Allison on it, and it's a Land and Sea box. And Land and Sea, I mean, I think you can buy shrimp from there. Anyway, this box that opens. It's not fancy, but it's a cardboard box that opens a certain way. And I have little tiny notes and letters and cards from the time I was a little one. I mean, to where words really started to matter to me, and words of love started to matter to me. So all previous loves, I have.
Love it.
So I have my very first boyfriend, a little note that he wrote in his handwriting I could recognize from anywhere. A little note that he wrote me. He called me Sweetness. I was all of 15, okay? He called me Sweetness.
Sweetness.
And he wrote me a little note in school that said, "Good morning, Sweetness."
Oh my gosh.
And I have that. It's a little tiny, like, torn
So
piece.
sweet.
All the way to, you know, really beautiful letters from family, too. I mean, those just mean a lot to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
So ephemeral. Sorry, I've been saying it wrong. New podcast, but ephemeral. So look it up if that at all interests you. I would say that's definitely something when we talk about generational callback. Like, that's definitely something, you know, for me with my context. Like, I love the things of previous generations, and so it's just been a podcast that has been really great. I think it's just a couple months in. So
I'm going to challenge our listeners. When was the last time you wrote a note or a letter, handwritten, and mailed that off to someone or passed it to them? I think that would be a great way to make sure that the beauty of handwriting does not fade quickly.
Yeah.
It's really a gift. It truly is.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm going to, since there's been so much digging around in basement storage, I think I'm going to dig around and find my notes. I don't know if Reed listens to this podcast. I would be delighted if he did. He's a phenomenal photographer. But just to think back to that, I mean, that was... Well, that was a different...
Good morning.
That's a different one. That's a different one. I hope he doesn't. And I won't mention him by name, but it's a 4-letter word. And
oh no,
it starts with D. So anyway.
All right.
But if Reed happens to listen, I just think it's so hilarious. We hardly spent time together.
Yeah.
So our entire relationship was built upon these letters back and forth. And sometimes phone calls, which was long distance back then.
Yeah.
So very limited phone calls and letters. And, you know, we met at band camp and then didn't ever see each other again until we got reconnected on social media. It's just so funny to think about that.
Crazy.
Because everybody has one of those. I hope everyone has one of those stories.
Yeah.
You know, band camp love. Well, not everyone went to band camp.
Yeah, so I was didn't go to band camp. We're serving in the Minnesota page as a page in the House of Representatives. Some of us, you know.
But I think about that and my introduction to music. In a lot of ways, there was new music I learned about. He was all into Metallica, and so he would put He would draw the Metallica logo, I guess, the band name, and then quote Metallica lyrics.
Oh my gosh.
Which were not super loving.
That's hilarious.
A little bit of hate metal goes a long way. So anyway, listeners, I'd like to know, when was the last time you wrote a letter or note? And I also would love to hear any of those kinds of
stories. Oh, yes.
Stories of letters. I mean, have you read The Notebook? Have you seen the movie?
Yeah, I've seen the movie. I mean, it's very nice and kind. It's like, it's not the kind of movie I'm just going to watch, right? Like,
only I've watched it 5,000 times. It's the only movie that I would say it's one of the few movies that I own on DVD, but it's my go-to to get my cry out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I have a couple friends like that. I'm just not a big Nicholas Sparks person.
I'm not either, and then we saw him at UNO, and I'm really not now, but but I love that story.
Yeah, it is.
Because of, I think probably, let's do a little bit of strength spotting there with my communication, but because of the letters.
Yeah.
And how he wrote to her, and what a difference those letters would have made.
And didn't he, like, build her a house, like, acts of service?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And her name's
absolutely.
Allie.
Her name's Allie. Oh, man, there we go.
So.
All the spotting. Okay. So I love those. Oh, man. No, I think I've watched that movie once or twice, but...
Ephemeral?
Ephemeral.
Ephemeral.
Sorry.
Okay.
Now I'm going to know it because I said it wrong 12 times.
So we'll check that podcast out.
Ephemeral. So check it out. Yep. But when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I just think if you guys are of the teammates world, I know a lot of people aren't that listen, but we are in the midst of our really busy season. I feel like July hit yesterday.
It did, literally.
Literally, it hit yesterday, and I think everything hit the wall. Like, that's just what I feel like.
How about fan?
I mean, it hit the fan.
I hit the wall.
Oh, yeah.
My forehead hit the wall.
Oh, absolutely.
And things hit the fan. That's how I feel, too.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So we're in crunch time with our annual conference coming up, and just so many, I just think chaotic things happening in our life, in our world. And so I think it's times like these where we forget about the things that really matter, like why are we doing things. And so I thought of all the intentional conversations where you and I have to carve out an hour of our workday where we have tons of things to do, right, but we're still creating the space to have real conversation.
Yes.
What should we talk about? And I was like, I would just love to talk about your purpose and why, right? Because in the midst of your why, right, so in the midst of craziness and busyness, I think we forget the intention and the why behind what we do. And I feel like I get this so much, doing research here. I am trying to turn around what is over 20,000 cases of data into producible metrics for people to use and make decisions on for the future of their programs, for the future of the kids' lives they're impacting within their communities. Right. And so, but that looks like crunching a ton of numbers all the time. Not getting a whole lot of breaks, I'm not like a workhorse or anything. I don't want anyone to hear that, but really trying to be able to turn it around so it's ready for people. When they come to conference, they can see their dashboards, they can bring it back to their boards, they can learn about how they did this past year. But it's really easy to get bogged down into the details and into the specifics. And I think we all just become a little sharper and a little more sandpapery when we interact with other people because we just have so much to do. And I don't know. So I guess I think when I was thinking about what could be an intentional conversation, even for our well-being, as we take an hour to stop and have a conversation, I just thought talking about our purpose, our why, in kind of a succinct way would be helpful. And then I'd love to dive into maybe a little more of some stuff on values. So when you think about, I know you are reviewing forms and making changes and edits to processes and reviewing the 300-page program management manual. So when you think about all of those details of what you're doing, what would you say is your purpose in the midst of all the work that you're doing? Why are you doing what you're doing?
So I want to backtrack one step and say I want to own and be honest about that. As I was leaving work at about 8:15 last night, I first sent an email to you and said, can we put this off? Yep. I'm a stress bucket, as I like to say. I'm so far behind. I have so much I need to do. And oftentimes in this time of year, my to-do list is based on someone else's to-do list being accomplished before I can start on my to-do list. Yep. And I don't do that very well. I'll be honest, I'm not very patient that way. And I feel like this time of year, I should be in practice mode to shine what we're going to provide coming up in the end of this month. Whereas now I feel like I'm recreating again, and I don't like that feeling of recreating because I think sometimes we have things that are working really well, and I'd like to just shine them instead of tear them down and start them all over. However, so I want to own the fact that as I was leaving, I said, hey, can we wait until you get back from California? Tess is going to California.
My adaptability in action bought a plane ticket a week and a half ago.
She's going this week, and I'm really excited for you because it's awesome. But I was thinking, let's just wait until after you get back. And then this morning, I went for a run early, and I was coming back thinking, how do I take care of myself during this time? And of all things that matter most to me, it's about meaningful conversation and connection. And so why am I pushing off meaningful conversation and connection when actually my self-care needs that the most right now? So I reached out to you via text and said, hey, if you still want to do it, like really basically saying, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Please forgive me. Can we do this still?
Yeah.
And because I get a lot out of podcasts and they motivate me. Mm-hmm. And if my purpose and my why is believing that I can help one person, and ideally in my world right now as I'm preparing things for conference, I'm going to help one person to show up for fill in the blank. If I can help one person to show up for conference excited about the speakers that I'm reaching out to on a regular basis now and trying to figure out their AV needs and how many print copies they need for 30 different people. When I'm thinking about that, is one piece of that going to influence one person who wants to come to conference? Is that one person who comes to conference going to be influenced by the presentation that I give on mentor training certification and be excited about being a trainer, which will in turn look like a trainer who makes mentors excited about showing up for a kid, and then at the end of the day, that mentor shows up for that kid.
Yeah.
So in my mind, my purpose and my why is always around ripple effect. Mm-hmm. Knowing that the choices and the decisions that I make, the gifts that I have been given, the talents that I can give to this world are so much about how I can help other people feel like they matter so that they can show up so that someone else feels like they matter. I mean, there's so many, especially this time of year, I think about all the things that I learned from Shane. And a lot of them were statistical and sciencey in nature, but it was just the way that he spoke about and reminded me of the ripple effect. And those little ripples of hope building go so much further than we ever really know. So I was thinking this morning, I'm motivated by podcasts, and one of my favorite is Maria Shriver and her Meaningful Conversations. She decided, I guess, to do this in seasons, because at the end of the last one, she said, that's our last one for the season, and I cried out, no! It's part of my Monday, Maria. What are you doing? So I thought, what? No, I'm not saying that there is anybody out there that so looks forward to Genn and Millie that if we took a break or a sabbatical from it that they would be devastated. However, I thought if there's something that we say today that motivates someone to feel better about who they are, more confident in their authentic self, more determined to give more to the world, then that's my why.
I love it. So when you think about your values, so values are these underpinnings, so our why is like a statement of purpose, right? But your values are what guides decisions, right? So when you think about, and we've done the values exercise on here before, I think when we were still doing video, so I didn't necessarily want to bring that out or do that again, but I did want to have a conversation about it, because I think just like our why, our purpose can kind of get smushed in the midst of busy, crazy, stressful seasons. I think we can forget about our values, or our values might manifest in a negative way, or if they aren't being honored in our decision making, that can be difficult. If you were to summarize you have your why is creating meaningful connections and having a ripple effect for those around you through those, right? Or through the things that you do. What would you say is your number one value that guides those decisions around your why?
It's connection. It's connection. I mean, I make it so easy sometimes for you to spot my connectedness. I feel like you're just going to bounce out of your chair with the hashtag. I just think that we're all here to connect with one another, but to provide a bigger, better tomorrow for those that are here when we're not.
Yeah. And I think of the value that I see in you in terms of how I interpret a lot of your behavior is authenticity.
I want people to feel like they can be who they are.
Yeah. And that definitely lends itself to your intrinsic value, internal value of connection, but externally it looks like authentic self is showing up, right? It's okay, I'm stressed and you know it because that's just where I'm at today.
Right, I just came in and dumped a whole lot of information on Tess before we started this podcast. Because I can feel it physically in my body when I can't be true to who I am and I'm not being honest and authentic. I like take all this energy in and it just feels like pain in my lower back. Yeah. Or stress in my shoulders. Because at the end of the day, I want everyone to feel like they can be who they are. Yeah. And that includes me.
Yep, absolutely.
But I tend to probably put that lower on the list. Yeah. Which is why this time of year I will go above and beyond because I tend to put my own well-being last.
So you talked a little bit about these conversations, but what else looks like self-care in stressful times?
A little bit of retreat. So I'm going to take care of a little puppy dog for the next few days. And my friend Jeremy loves his dog. And the fact that he would choose me, I mean, I can tell that this is a big deal. And I sent him a text and said, I feel like I'm going to a spa retreat because they've got a jacuzzi tub and a steam shower. I'm like, this is great. And I said, I feel like I'm going to a spa retreat. And he said, we're just so glad it's you. It was something like that. We're just so glad it's you watching or taking care of Busy. The dog's name is Busy. Bizy. And he's a little Yorkie. But I was thinking, how lucky am I that someone considers me worthy of something that's so important to them. Those kinds of things really matter. So that's going to be, I've got a stack of books, of course, that I want to get to. But disconnect right now in the midst of so much connection is an important part of self-care for me.
Oh, yeah.
So that my meaningful connections can be more purposeful and I can be more present. But I'm so scattered right now, I know that I'm not present.
Yeah. Good.
Now, I'm going to ask the same of you. Now, this is what I will say and what I witness about you currently, lately. There's a lot more intention in, I hate using the phrase living your best life because everybody's throwing that around like confetti. But I see you being very intentional about living now. And here comes an experience. Okay, so let's just do a little tiny bit of summary of 2019 for you so far. Okay, so from what I can think of up the top of my head, you ran a marathon.
Half marathon.
Okay, you've never done that before?
Nope.
You went on a trip that you had no idea where you were going.
Yep.
But you know what? Let's not even do the whole year. Let's do the last couple of months. This summer-ish.
Yeah.
May to now. You're going to San Francisco.
Yep.
And I'm witnessing you stepping into more of a knowledge of who you are, what you want to do, and where you're headed.
Yep.
And we do a lot of getting pretty personal here, but that's your personal journey. I've got my personal journey, but I'm thinking you've made some big life decisions about what's next for Tess. So I think about in the short summer months, the intentionality that you have given to, I'm going to do this. Yeah. And then just kind of witnessing not your look, but the way that you now present yourself is so much more you than I've ever seen you be.
The bangs really help.
Is it just the bang? First step to authentic self, cut your hair. Just kidding. Just kidding. Don't tell everyone to do bangs because I've been through a bad stage with that.
Yeah, I've heard most people it doesn't go well.
But yours did. But I think you're stepping into a more authentic you.
And I think that comes with, like, I did a lot of values auditing and purpose auditing in my own life, right? Like
contemplation.
Contemplation, that's my word for the year, of what does, when I get to the end of my life, what does success look like to me? Like, what do I want to such a millennial thing. Like, how do I want to change the world, right? Like, no, but like,
that's you.
What are my unique giftings and callings that I say and I think that God's given me in order to share that with people, right? Like, what's my purpose here? And so, yeah, I think and that book has really helped. I know I talked about this on the podcast, that like simple workbook that I work through of like, what does 5 years from now look like? And the whole purpose of Reclaim Your Mondays, which has turned into make every day a Friday with my friends, which is an expensive lifestyle. So I don't do that for everybody.
I wondered if this trip to California is a reclaiming of your Monday, and I'm thinking, wow, we'll reclaim the 4th of July, I guess.
Reclaim the 4th of July. No, it actually isn't. It worked out. I got a free flight. My friend is working through some stuff in her own counseling, and she was like, I really just feel like I need the beach. I love the water. Like, I just need to, have time. And I'll definitely, because nothing is calm here, be bringing my laptop and working, but it'll be with a much better view and much better food in the evening to try and things like that, But, and I'm excited. We're taking a couple day trips, like up to the Redwoods and to Napa and Sonoma do some wine tasting. But
I can't believe you've never been.
I've never been to the West Coast. So much of my travel has been international. So I've done a wine tour in France, right? Like, I've done a wine tour in Italy, right? I have not done one in California yet, right?
But I think when you get, California is where my soul belongs, so I'm so biased. But when you'll get there, you'll think, I can't believe it took me this long to get here.
Yeah.
And that's really how I...
And I'm excited. My family would like to go back there, or to go to San Francisco soon, because my mom actually grew up in Petaluma, California.
Oh, really?
Yep. And my grandma immigrated from Mexico when she was 16 and met my grandpa. They were both working at a factory in California, and they met, and my grandpa was getting his pilot license. So the story of them meeting is just the funniest thing in the whole world. Like, he would take these he had a small plane. He was getting his pilot's license, and it was after World War II, and they were much older. They're in their 90s. They had my mom when they were really old, or a lot older. So they're both deceased now. But so he would take these day trips, or where he would just fly to Portland, or he'd fly to Las Vegas, or he'd fly to Los Angeles, take these trips. And so they were working at the same place, and they didn't really know each other at all. But my grandma had a friend who was friends with him, and so she would get his itinerary. So she wanted to run into him because she wanted to date him. And so she found out that he was going to some city in Northern California for that weekend. So she took a bus there and wanted to run into him. Well, it ended up raining the whole weekend, so he changed his plans and went to a different city, and she didn't find out till Monday.
Well, because you couldn't, of course.
You couldn't find out. And so anyway, she ended up asking him out, right? And they were married my grandpa died when he was 95. And my grandma they had like a 20-year age gap. She was in her 70s when she passed away, and just like it's just the coolest story.
What year did they meet?
Ooh.
Like, estimate. And think about a woman asking out a man at that time.
Yeah, it must have been 48, 49.
Oh my gosh.
1949.
Your grandma must have been something.
Oh, she totally was. She was spitfire. Like, oh my gosh. Like, she would have been a burning bra feminist if she was around at that point, right? Like, or if she was like in that culture. But so they built a house from scratch, from the ground up, outside of Petaluma, California, in the 60s. And so it's totally mid-century model. Like, I would move into it as it is now, and it's absolutely beautiful. And so my mom wants to bring us there to her childhood home. She lived there till she was like 12, 13, before they moved back to Minnesota, because my grandpa's family's from Minnesota.
And Petaluma is right outside of Sonoma.
Yeah. Yep.
So where we stayed at Klein that's where we would go to the grocery store and everything, wasn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's where she grew up. And so she, I guess, had this in her head that she always wanted to bring us there. So when I told her I was going, I was like, sorry, Mom, I didn't know. So we're going to plan a family trip back there so she can show us the house and the beach she was at. And she tells the story of, she was like 10, and one of the Star Wars films had just come out, and her brother went to see it, and there was an earthquake in the midst of it. So everyone evacuated the theater, but they had paid to see the movie, so they stayed through the whole movie.
Your mom has discipline, right?
She totally does. Number one. And so they left the theater after the movie was done, and they're like walking and jumping over the earthquake cracks, in the road, and it was one of the biggest ones during that decade.
Oh my gosh.
It was in San Francisco. I went and saw it. So yeah. Anyway,
so I'm so glad
so
you're
fun.
going.
So sorry, major side note.
So let's go back to what do you feel like is your why?
So I think, like, just my why overall in life, I think, and I've always kind of said this, is like, numbers matter because people matter. Like, I feel like I always will be a social scientist regardless of wherever my life takes me, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I just always love observing people. I always love kind of measuring behavior, charting the uniqueness and who people are. And so I think that, yeah, and that's how I really explain my job here, is that, these seem like a lot of analytics, and I'm doing all these statistical frameworks and things like that over our numbers, but behind every single number is a real life person whose life is being impacted, right? Like, it's a mentee, we're working to help them achieve their full potential, and on the flip side is a mentor whose life is being impacted. And so I think every day that I get bogged down with data and the fact that I'm gonna have to bring my work computer to California with me, like, bummed, but it has to happen because it's so busy here that, like, I'm like, but it matters. Like, what I'm doing matters. What we're doing matters. Because, we served over 10,000 youth this past year. 10,000, I ran it the other day. It was like 10,287 or something like that. Pretty close to that. It was in the 10,200 range. But, just to think that, like, yeah. And I think that's always where I've been, right? Is even all my undergraduate scientific research, even the things that I would do, like, when we're talking to Vicky in screening the other day, and I said, oh my gosh, the questions you asked, you're like the best social scientist. You get to pull people on the phone about diversity, right? Like, you are a social scientist here. And so, yeah, I guess that's always been, I think that's my why.
So I think our whys are very similar. There's some difference, but essentially we want to contribute. We want to give back. It shocked me when I recently realized that not everyone is like that. That everyone has a different purpose and everyone has a different why. Yeah. But it's kind of like the way that you came to strengths. Yeah. When you first learned about your top 5, you thought, well, doesn't everybody think like this? Yeah. Doesn't everyone love
like ephemeral?
Ephemeral, a podcast about the past? I think I sometimes often make the assumption that everyone else is showing up for the same reason.
I think that's a really good point, right? And I'll strength spot us because we both have connectedness in our top 10. And so I think connectedness is about the greater purpose or what is grander beyond us. And so I think there's a little bit of maybe that perspective, also maybe relationship building strengths that say my role here. I think every single person's life, regardless of if they are sitting in a basement and don't interact with anybody in person, their life is affecting other people, right? Absolutely. The choices that they make, the things that they buy, what they do with their time, how they interact or how they choose not to interact with someone.
Yep.
Like,
all choices.
They're all choices, and they impact other people regardless of if it's you're actually interacting with someone or you're choosing not to. Like, the lack of action also impacts others. And so I think you and I are both aware of those interactions and those connections when we're out at a grocery store or in traffic, like when I'm so frustrated, like whatever it might be. All of those things, I think we recognize that they have an impact on other people. And so I think it would be natural, right, that our purposes, our whys would be people-centric, I guess.
So when we think about that, reminded me this morning, I like to listen for and look for signs of what I should be focusing on. And I listen for the messages that I might be missing. Mm-hmm. So I read Sarah Van Brethnock's book, Simple Abundance, every morning, have for years. But this morning was about, really about choices and plan B. And I loved it. And I put it on my Instagram story, which I'm getting better at thanks to the children in my life who are reminding me that I am not supposed to do things a certain way. So the reality is that the day would be as hard as you make it, or as pleasant. There was nothing I could do about my circumstances but accept them. It's always my choice, I reminded myself, not necessarily to like whatever life throws at me, but to try and catch the ball. After all, success in life is not how well we execute plan A, it's how smoothly we cope with plan B.
Oh, that's good.
So when I think about that and I think about choices, I try to be very cognizant and aware of the fact that my reason, my why, my purpose, my reason for showing up is me. And one of the things that we learned at Gallup Summit, we talked a little about fault lines. As a presenter, what are your fault lines? So when you, I keep thinking about this in relationship to July. My reason for staying till 8:15 at night is going to be different than someone else's showing up till 8:15 or 7:30 in the morning, whatever that might be. My reason to show up here and work my tail off in July is going to be related to my why, but also those are the choices that I get to choose. And so much in our life is so related to choice. And when you really dive down, which I've witnessed you doing this year, Tess, with your word of the year, but also just with your intentionality, you've decided really what is my why, and these choices are going to honor that.
Right. I think we're in this whole process as an organization of creating a theory of change. And we hopefully will, by the end of the fall, kind of have that in place, because we have made decisions historically that were maybe good at the time or maybe seemed logical but didn't necessarily fit into our why as an organization. And now we're realizing that we are stretched and limited. And so we're going to have to start saying no to some things. And I think that's what a lot of work I've done personally, is that I could theoretically say yes to a lot of things, like a lot of, hey, will you volunteer to do this, or will you, lead us in this group or whatever. And I think the church world is kind of like that too. Like, at least my church, it's like, oh, we see potential in you as a leader, so we're going to ask you to do 10 things, right? Which is, I have loved and been in seasons where I've done all 10 things. But this has been a season where I feel like I have said what actually is my purpose, and
does it fit in there?
It doesn't fit in it, right? Like being able to hold up an offer, wherever that's coming from, if it's from a friend to go get a drink in the evening, or if it's from
say yes to
lead, I'll say yes, or like to maybe to go grab a drink when I have a paper due at midnight, because that happened recently, and I definitely still said yes to it and got my paper in and got 100% on it. But whatever, we'll make it work. But or if it's
don't listen to test kids.
don't try this at home. Or if it's like an ask to lead a ministry, or, speak on a weekend, so those things I'm able to, any offer that comes my way. I think, I just think this life or season of like self-reflection and this year of contemplation has allowed me to say, okay, I might want to do this, but when I hold it up to the light of where I'm going to be in 5 years, what's the best choice for that, right? Like, not what's the best choice for me now. And this really started back in November. I went through this retreat, and it was like a spiritual paths retreat, and it was a lot about goal setting, a lot about looking forward. And one of my signposts, because we had to look back from the previous year and say what were moments of consolation or moments of joy, and what were, or in the terminology they use, is where were movements towards God, and then what were moments of desolation, what were movements away from God, or not great moments, right? So we had to create these like signposts to give us warnings that we might be going into a time of desolation. And so one of my signposts, and what I realized is my moments of desolation, of movement away, have always been when I have chosen immediate gratification or immediate pleasure or excitement, right, rather than what is best in the long term for me, right? Like eating a cupcake. Okay, it might be great in the moment, but in the long run, that's probably not the best for me. So I've been very conscious about what I've been eating.
Yes.
Very conscious about how I spend my time. And so these things, I think, so my signpost is look to the long game. Because I think my strengths don't naturally lend there. My context looks back. My adaptability is so present focused. And so I think I've really had to say and ask myself that question all the time. of what's best in the long game, right? And I lean on my context to say, okay, I've tried this cupcake in the past and it doesn't work out well.
That's good use of that.
And so it helps me to look forward, right? Because we're always moving forward, but my strengths naturally lend themselves to go backwards.
But that allows you to be more thoughtful about your decision making.
Yeah.
So I feel like even though context may not be always pointing you forward, it gives you great research to say, is this effective in my long game?
Yep, absolutely.
And context is very low for me. I don't have the ability to look back and say, have I learned this lesson before? I guess not. Let's just try it again. And I practice growth mindset all the time.
Yeah.
My little sticky note on my growth mindset PowerPoint says, I don't make a mistake once or twice. I make it 6, 7, 8 times just, to be sure. That's essentially me. Now, when you're talking about what should I say no to, what a great question to ponder. What right now in your season should you really dial back and say no to? So July, everyone is in the middle of the midst of summer. Now in Teammates, the midst of summer, July means go time.
Yep.
For other people, it might mean dog days of summer, relax, sit under a tree, sip some lemonade, go to some live music events.
Oh, that sounds great.
Those kinds of things. But what should I say no to is a great question to contemplate if you're busy, or if you're in a more relaxed place. And then when I was thinking about your questions, this is so, of course it is, serendipity. You're presented with a choice, evolve or remain. If you choose to remain unchanged, you'll be presented with the same challenges, the same routine, the same storms, the same situations until you learn from them, until you love yourself enough to say no more, until you choose change. If you choose to evolve, you will connect with the strength within you. You'll explore what lies outside the comfort zone. You'll awaken to love. You will become, you will be. You have everything you need. Choose to evolve. Which I just wrote on Sunday. I didn't write that. Goodness, I didn't write that. Don't quote me. Craig Crippen wrote that, but I just pinned it. I have this fun little app called Day One. It's a little online journal where I can take a snap of something and then add. And then the questions that keep coming up are, what 3 things are you moving toward? And what 3 things are you leaving behind? So guess what, listeners? It's a new moon. It's a new moon today.
It's halfway through the year, so if you've abandoned your New Year's resolution, start them over again.
What 3 things are you looking toward? And what 3 things are you leaving behind?
That's really good. That's really good.
You could tell I was getting a little...
Yeah, I was like, it reminds me of, I took a screenshot of a, and I would totally saved it for Genn and Millie, but I don't think I brought my phone in here with me, but it was my, the quote was, my comfort zone will be the death of me.
Yep.
And I think that's so right. That's all that idea of choose to adapt, choose to change, right, when you're given the opportunity. And I think, I don't know, it's so scary. It's scary to think about so many things, what the future might hold, right? If we step out of that. And I know you and I are both thinking about very different things with our lives, but both of us are thinking about dreams that we have for what the future might be. The alternative.
What's plan B?
What's the alternative, right? And what's the, and that's where all of this, I think, self-reflection in my own life has brought me of at the end of my life, I don't want to be in the place that I'm at now, right? Relationally, maybe even job-wise, we'll see, love teammates, love my job, things like that, where I'm just these questions of what does a life well lived look like for me? And you're right, everybody's life well lived looks different, right? Everybody has different guiding principles. My value, if I would say my intrinsic value behind my why, is learning.
It is.
For me, it's if I'm not learning, I'm not growing. It totally is. It's irregardless of what I'm learning about. Right, I could be learning about anything, from murder to, a sermon, so, but I think, I don't know, I guess I'm just pondering, and I think it's so good to pause and think about these things, right?
Well, and we frame it in a way, or at least I hope we do, that helps people understand that this is normal.
Yeah.
So I just listened to a podcast the other day where they were talking about how often people feel stuck. And the presenter said, I wish that people could understand how many people are walking around right now feeling stuck. But not having these kinds of, sometimes these are, I mean, you heard my voice shaking a little bit there. These are difficult things to talk about sometimes, but so important for us to reframe our why and our purpose. And to think that I almost put this off today. Yeah. I needed this conversation so much. So much.
That's so good. I think about, actually, it reminded me of a podcast I listened to too, and it was an interview with a gal who runs an organization that I can't say because it's a swear word, but essentially it's for entrepreneurs that have failed. And she said she felt like the only person in the whole world that had ever failed in business because nobody ever talked about it. So she has these nights that are called like F nights. That's like the name of her organization. Yeah. Where essentially person after person gets up and talks about their failure. And that's kind of crazy, right, to think, and I especially think like in our strengths-based podcast world here, right, we like to think about what goes well, what are recent successes, but I think our strengths come out so much in times of stress, in times of failure, growth. In times of, right, that's growth. And so I think we can talk about strengths within a negative setting, right, and I think there's power in that. And so I loved what she said is she said she didn't talk about her failure in business for 7 years because she thought she was the only one. And then there was one night where she was hanging out with a bunch of her entrepreneur friends. She lives in Mexico City, and they were all talking about, one brought up a business that didn't go well, another brought up a business that failed. So she finally shared about it. She said the release that I felt in knowing that there were other people who failed, right? And I think we don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about being stuck enough. We don't talk about what we think of as failure enough, right? And I'm not even a huge fan of that word, right? Because it's a growth opportunity in my mind, right? It's a learning in my mind from my values. But it was just such a poignant moment to me to say, yeah, I don't talk to people about that a lot. So sometimes we can get so enclosed in our own minds and in our own self that we forget that other people are walking through similar situations of being stuck or having experienced failure or whatever it is.
Well, we often say this in training. I often say this in training. Your strengths are your strengths, whether you're in a sunshine moment or you're in the swamp. Yep. And I think when they really truly become superpowers and tools and indicators of your best self is when we really look at them during those times of struggle and swamp and say, how can this help me?
Yeah, absolutely.
How can I apply this input, communication, strategic woo, and empathy to help me through a very difficult time? Because this is truly an indicator of me at not only my best, but also my most authentic. Yep. So when I'm not allowed to ask my questions, that just won't work. I love questions.
When you're not allowed to share quotes. I think you've shared 4 today during the course of the last 45 minutes.
But I am, and what I'm learning is not everyone in my life has to be a question asker, but they can be receptive to this is me. Yep. And I can in turn do the same thing.
And I think that's the line, right? So, like, I have a couple examples of people, and I know that you have said this too, where I'm like, it's a little bit like, where people say they hate history. I mean, you can hate history. That's fine. But there's a difference between you sitting and hating history personally, like you're not going to go look something up, and you sitting and listening to me share about something I love about history. And there's a big difference, right? So you might not like to learn about history, but you listening to me sharing something about history that I've recently discovered, or the ethereal,
well, you light up
podcast, right?
You light up. Who doesn't want to be around somebody lighting up? I don't care what it's about. When I see someone light up, I just you want to be in that energy. You're drawn. Yeah. It's like this is a really bad analogy. It's like the bug zapper.
Well, the bugs go to it.
Well, that's so me. I'm just right to it. Get electrocuted. But I think when there is light and energy, people want to be part of that. Yeah. And so when people are in their purpose and they're in their why, they're drawn to that. When I think about where we are as an organization, and oftentimes I hear people say, oh my gosh, you must love what you do. I do. And I think people see that and they witness that. Yeah. And people want to be part of that. But I think it's also in the way that we frame the struggle times too.
Yeah.
That this isn't all sunshine, rainbows, pot of gold here. Sometimes there is a lot of work,
Yep.
and a lot of stress that goes into the month of July, so that come conference time, there's lots of sunshine and light. That's important to me, that if I have to work really hard for, an entire year to get to the point where those 5 minutes are meaningful to somebody, that's what matters to me. And I know that's what matters to you.
And that totally is, because if you go back to your why, your purpose, right, of the ripple effect and your value of connection, it makes sense. For other people with different, that might not be worth it.
And I know that you are lit up thinking about somebody looking at their dashboards and saying,
I hope people look at their dashboards.
but I know that you do. I know that you are excited when someone comes up and says, wow, Tess, I look at from last year to now, we've had growth. Or thank you for running this, or this was great information, or I'm going to go home and present this to my board, or I'm going to go home and take this to my school board.
That's like ideal. I think I get that once or twice.
But I think back to however many years ago in York when you did the experiment.
Oh, that was so much fun.
As a presenter on data, you made it so come to life.
Yeah, I made a lemon volcano.
Because again, that's you and your why, and that's you and your purpose, because you're bringing what might be a very mundane, boring topic to light.
Oh yeah, all about that. So lots of really good questions. So first, a little bit of what's your why? If you were to define your purpose, what would that be? What would that purpose be? And then secondly, what value, like what's probably the number one value intrinsically that guides your behavior that comes out of your purpose and your why? Secondly, I think it was the what are you going to say no to?
Yep.
What are you saying no to now? What could you say no to in your life?
Great question.
Which I think is a really good question. I think I just love the phrase of living with some margin. I had Allie's daughter over to help do a closet clean out because I felt like I had no margin to even look through what I had in my closet. And that's what I sent her a text and I said, thank you. You have no idea how much this improves my well-being because I have margin now. And so what can you say no to create a little more margin in your life? And then thirdly, what are the 3 things you're moving towards? And what are the 3 things you're moving away from? What are the 3 things you're leaving? So I think we're always in motion, right? Even if we're not intentionally saying no to something, we're naturally moving towards.
Even if we're stuck, we're still in motion.
We're still in motion. All right. Oh, what a good conversation and a good break from our...
Thanks,
let's get
Tess.
back to the normal to-dos after this. But we want to thank you all for tuning in to episode 45 of Genn and Millie. So please, we'd love to hear your feedback from this. I forgot one of the points of write a letter to somebody. Or share a story with us. That was in this conversation. I love that. So I'll put that as probably number 1. When's the last time you've written a handwritten letter? And if you haven't in a while, write a letter to somebody.
I'll dig up mine and show you that wonderful handwriting.
Yes.
It probably still smells like Calvin Klein Obsession.
There you go. So would love, wonderful. Would love to hear a little bit about your experiences, your own reflections. Share with us some of the answers or responses you have to the questions we post. I feel like I realize when I look at our analytics that quite a few people listen to this, and I'm just like, it feels like a conversation between you and me. And so please, other people, be vulnerable with us and share your responses to this episode. So you can interact with us and share your responses to the questions we pose by following us on Instagram is a great way, at Genn and Millie. That's at GennandMillie. Until next time.